World War II began on the 1st of September, 1939. Standing before the German Reichstag, Adolf Hitler declared, "Last night, for the first time, regular Polish troops fired on our territory." From that moment, Poland's fate was sealed in darkness. A storm of destruction was unleashed. Warsaw was bombed relentlessly. The nation fell under brutal occupation. Its sovereignty was wiped off the map in just weeks, just days before the invasion. On August 23, 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed a pact that would decide Poland's destiny. Despite their ideological differences, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin found common ground. The annihilation of the Polish state. Their foreign ministers, Joachim von Ribbentrop and Vyacheslav Molotov, signed what would become infamous as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Officially, it was a non-aggression treaty, but secretly, it contained a far more sinister clause: the complete division of Poland. Germany would take the West, including Warsaw. The Soviet Union would seize the East. Stalin also secured a free hand to expand his influence into the Baltic states, into Bessarabia and Bukovina in Romania, and even into Finland's Karelia region. But Stalin wasn't ready to act. The Red Army was still entangled in a brutal border war with Japan and Manchukuo at Khalkhin Gol in the Far East. He needed time to secure victory there and to protect his rear flank in Siberia before turning west. Meanwhile, Hitler was done waiting. By August 30th, with the invasion imminent, Poland ordered full mobilization of its military, but London and Paris, desperate to avoid a repeat of 1914, pressed Warsaw to hold back. Clinging to a faint hope for diplomacy, the delay allowed Poland's navy to evacuate its three most important destroyers, slipping out of the Baltic Sea through the Danish Straits and into the safety of British waters. This quiet move spoke volumes. War was now almost inevitable. Then, on the night of August 31st, it began, with deception. The Nazis staged a false flag attack. In what became known as the Gleiwitz Incident, SS operatives, disguised as Polish rebels, stormed a German radio station in Upper Silesia. They bound the staff, fired shots in the air, and broadcast messages in Polish urging rebellion against Germany. Attention, this is Gleiwitz. The station is in Polish hands. It was a theater of lies, but it gave Hitler the excuse he needed. At dawn the next day, September 1st, Germany invaded. World War II had begun. The operation was codenamed Fall Weiss. The German High Command handed leadership of the invasion to General Walter von Brauchitsch. Their plan? A pincer movement from the north and the south. From the north, Army Group North, led by Fedor von Bock, advanced with the 3rd Army from East Prussia and the 4th Army from Pomerania. Their aim? Surround Warsaw and cut Poland off from the Baltic Sea. From the south, Army Group South under Gerd von Rundstedt launched a simultaneous strike. The 14th Army pushed in from Slovakia, while the 8th Army. From the industrial heartlands of Silesia, 2 German armies, the 10th and the 8th, surged forward, aiming to tear through the Polish plains and crush enemy forces in their path. At the same time, within the free city of Danzig, the ethnic German minority rose in defiance of Polish authority. Organized into paramilitary SS units known as the Heimwehr Danzig and led by Hans Friedemann Goetze, and while Landauenhaus, they launched raids and sabotage operations from within the city, paving the way for German troops to enter unopposed. The Wehrmacht had mobilized a monstrous force, 1.8 million soldiers, 58 divisions, over 4,300 tanks, and 2,300 aircraft. Backed by a navy of 84 warships, Hitler's war machine stood ready to unleash a devastating assault on Poland. By contrast, The Polish army in 1939 was a shadow of the force that had once defeated the Soviets and its neighbors 2 decades earlier. Years of military budget cuts had delayed both weapons modernization and officer training. One of Poland's greatest vulnerabilities was its centralized command structure, an outdated system instituted by Marshal Józef Piłsudski and left unchanged by his successor, Marshal Edward Rydz-Śmigły. Every decision, no matter how minor, required the commander-in-chief's approval, dramatically slowing down operational response. Meanwhile, the German army championed decentralized command, empowering its officers to act with independence and initiative. Strategically, Poland had made a critical miscalculation. For 20 years, its eastern frontier had been fortified against a potential Soviet invasion, while its western border remained largely undefended against German aggression. When the Polish Plan Z was finally activated to reinforce the western frontier, 2 fatal errors were made. First, Poland deployed its best divisions without sufficient defensive fortifications. Second, it left the eastern border almost completely exposed, vulnerable to a potential Red Army incursion. Compounding these failures was the sluggish mobilization process, taking anywhere from 2 to 15 days, an impossible delay in the face of blitzkrieg warfare. Then, there was the issue of Poland's demographic makeup. Only 60% of the population was ethnically Polish. The rest were Germans, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Lithuanians, Jews, and Czechoslovakians. A complex mosaic that strained national unity at the worst possible moment. Against this backdrop, Poland's position at the outbreak of war was perilously fragile, yet nationalistic fervor ran high. Slogans like "On to Berlin" were chanted in the streets, spurred by misplaced optimism in the final weeks before the invasion. The Polish army, 1 million strong, fielded 880 tanks and 334 aircraft divided across 39 divisions and 16 brigades. Forces were deployed across 3 main sectors, from the Baltic coast down to Silesia. Reserve units and Border Defense Corps were tasked with protecting the rear lines, but nothing could stop the iron storm that was about to be unleashed. At exactly 4:45 a.m. on September 1, 1939, 3 German Junkers Stuka dive bombers soared over Poland at an altitude of 3,500 meters. Their target, the Dierschau Bridge, a critical crossing over the Vistula River. Lieutenant Bruno Dilly led the formation. As he approached the target, he throttled back, closed his coolant flaps, deployed his dive brakes, then tipped his aircraft into a steep plunge. On the ground, Polish sentries looked skyward in confusion, unsure of the source of the strange mechanical roar. At just 900 meters, Dilly released his bombs. The explosion shattered the bridge and destroyed nearby fortifications. It was the first aerial assault of the German invasion, and the opening act of a war that would claim over 80 million lives in just 6 years. 5 minutes after the bombs fell, at 4:50 a.m., the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein emerged from the Baltic Sea and positioned itself off the Polish naval base at Westerplatte in Danzig. There, 220 Polish soldiers under Major Henryk Sucharski held their ground, armed with just 3 artillery pieces and 4 mortars. As dawn broke, the warship's massive 280mm naval guns roared to life, pounding the base and reducing its structures to rubble in minutes. Soon after, 1,725 German troops launched a combined assault on Westerplatte. Among them, 225 naval infantry stormed the docks, while 1,500 SS Heimwehr Danzig militia, led by Lieutenant Wilhelm Henningsen, advanced from the nearby Newport. But the Polish defenders, dug into the ruins, fought back fiercely. They inflicted 82 German casualties, while suffering only 1 fatality among their own. Though Westerplatte stood defiant, the rest of Danzig fell rapidly. Most government buildings were captured with little resistance, save one. At the city's post office, a band of Polish postal workers, led by Konrad Guderski, mounted a spirited defense, holding out for hours against overwhelming odds. Meanwhile, across Poland's skies, over 1,000 Luftwaffe aircraft launched a full-scale aerial assault on key strategic targets. Heavy bombers struck from high altitudes while low-flying fighters strafed airfields. At Rakowicz Airport alone, 28 Polish aircraft were destroyed before they could even leave the ground. As the Luftwaffe cleared the skies, German artillery lit up the front lines, pummeling Polish defenses into dust. Behind the shell fire, waves of German tanks and infantry surged forward, smashing through every barrier in their path. The invasion had begun. Poland was being swallowed, hour by hour, by the fury of blitzkrieg. Let me know if you'd like this split into timed 6-second scenes for AI from East Prussia. The German Third Army surged forward, smashing through Polish trenches and pushing relentlessly westward. At the same time, the Fourth Army advanced from Pomerania with a singular goal: to cut off access to the Baltic Sea ports. By the end of the first day of World War II, Poland was in a state of crisis. Relentless German artillery barrages and attacks from armored trains, like the infamous Leopold, had shattered defensive lines. Poland's Air Force and Navy were neutralized early on, both in the skies and at sea, drastically limiting any chance of counterattack. Though Polish forces managed to temporarily slow the German advance in Pomerania, in the southern Carpathians, and through the Danzig corridor, the Wehrmacht encountered virtually no resistance. September 2, 1939, the second day of the war, marked a decisive breakthrough for the Third Reich. German Third and Fourth Armies successfully linked their fronts, securing full control over the Danzig corridor. In the now defunct Free City of Danzig, ethnic Germans greeted the invaders with jubilation, hailing them as liberators. But that day's greatest tragedy unfolded at the Battle of Bzura. In a desperate move, Polish cavalry launched a frontal charge against German panzer tanks. Armed only with sabers and lances, it was a horrific mismatch. Their traditional tactics and outdated equipment were obliterated by the modern firepower of German machine guns and tank cannons. The result? A massacre. Entire Polish units were wiped out. In the early hours of September 3rd, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and King George VI issued a formal ultimatum to Berlin: withdraw your forces from Poland by 11 a.m. or face war. No response came. No changes on the ground. The deadline passed, and so began the Allies' entry into the war. Due to time zone differences, New Zealand was the first to declare war on Germany, followed by Australia, Britain, and France. In the days that followed, many other countries and colonial territories of the British and French empires joined the conflict, transforming the Danzig crisis into a global war. Over 2 million Polish soldiers would be captured during the invasion. Roughly 1.5 million fell into Soviet hands. Among them, 250,000 died in labor camps or were executed outright, most notoriously in the Katyn massacre, where 20,000 Polish officers and intellectuals were slaughtered by the Soviet NKVD. Germany held approximately 600,000 prisoners, while Slovakia detained only a few. Many Polish prisoners died in concentration camps or during Operation Tannenberg, a brutal campaign targeting Polish elites and resistance. Yet even under occupation, some escaped. More than 105,000 Poles fled to neutral countries like Hungary, Romania, and the Baltic states. From there, many journeyed to Britain to continue the fight alongside the exiled Polish government. After Poland fell, the Axis powers and the Soviet Union celebrated their joint victory with chilling coordination. In the city of Brest-Litovsk, German and Soviet troops marched side by side beneath the banners of the swastika and the hammer and sickle, in a military parade that symbolized one of the most cynical alliances in modern history. By the autumn of 1939, General Gerd von Rundstedt and SS Chief Simon Krieger arrived in Warsaw. There, the Wehrmacht held a grand military parade, attended by none other than Adolf Hitler himself. Meanwhile, in the town of Komancha, German forces paraded shoulder to shoulder with their Slovak allies, and in the city of Lviv, German units marched alongside Ukrainian militias. groups that had actively collaborated during the invasion. With Poland crushed, the country ceased to exist as an independent state. Its lands were carved up by four powers: Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, Slovakia, and neutral Lithuania, which claimed its own slice of the spoils. Germany annexed the western regions, areas with significant ethnic German populations, and established a general government to administer the rest. The Soviet Union absorbed the eastern territories, folding them into the republics of Ukraine and Belarus. Slovakia held on to a narrow strip in the south, and Lithuania was granted control over the Vilna region. But for Poland's Jews, the darkest chapter had only just begun. After Hitler's swift conquest, Poland fell under brutal Nazi administration. At the time, Jews made up roughly 10% of the population. Overnight, they became targets of violence, humiliation, looting, and forced labor. Under the twisted banner of racial ideology and anti-Semitic hatred, the Nazis sought to sever Jews from the rest of the population. Their answer was the ghetto. Typically placed in the poorest districts, these ghettos were encircled by walls, fences, or barbed wire. Jewish families, some who had lived in their homes for generations, were given only days, sometimes hours, to pack what little they could and relocate into overcrowded, crumbling neighborhoods. No one knew how long they would be trapped inside or what horrors awaited them beyond the gates. Stripped of their rights, their homes, and their livelihoods, Poland's Jews were left vulnerable to hunger, disease, exploitation, and despair. The Nazi regime created over 1,200 ghettos across Eastern Europe. These were never meant to protect or preserve life. They were a stopgap, a temporary containment, while the Nazi leadership plotted the so-called final solution. The conditions were unbearable. No clean water, no access to food, no sanitation. Tens of thousands perished within the ghetto walls, not from bullets or gas, but from starvation, sickness, and neglect. It remains unclear if these ghettos were initially intended as death traps, but their toll was catastrophic nonetheless. In the heart of Warsaw in 1940, entire Jewish neighborhoods were sealed off. The designated area, traced back to a medieval Jewish quarter, its roots embedded in the old Duchy of Poland. At first, the displaced residents were allowed to move freely. They traded, worked, tried to hold on to fragments of normal life, even as uncertainty thickened around them like smoke. But on November 2nd, 1940, everything changed. SS troops stormed the district. The exits were sealed, and Warsaw's Jews were trapped behind walls as the world outside turned its back. Without any prior warning, construction crews began laying bricks and stone. In just a few short hours, a wall was rising, 4 meters high and stretching 18 kilometers across. By November 16th, the Warsaw Ghetto had been sealed completely. Over 300,000 Jews were locked inside its boundaries, and that number kept growing. At the height of World War II, nearly 500,000 people were trapped in a space that made up just 4.5% of the city. This was now the largest ghetto in all of Europe. A rectangular prison, about 4.5 kilometers long, 2.5 wide, divided into two main sectors, the large ghetto and the small ghetto, linked only by a wooden footbridge that spanned Chłodna Street. Inside this grim perimeter lay crucial streets and strategic points, like Nowa Lipki Street, where the Jewish Council operated, Plac Tłomaki, home to the synagogues, and Stocky Street, where the hospital stood. Other important roads included Lubecki Street, leading to Warsaw's northern train station, as well as the relatively privileged quarters on Wielka and Siena. Meanwhile, the bustling Poznan-Berlin highway cut straight through the ghetto. A surreal sight where German tourists could peer from cars and buses, gawking at the imprisoned Jews as if they were a roadside attraction in some dark spectacle. Inside, the conditions were inhumane. More than 12 people crammed into every 100 square meters, the average 7 souls per tiny room. Many no larger than 6 square meters. Some apartments held 30 people, in silence, in hunger, in fear. The ghetto had about 1,500 residential buildings and 43 food warehouses. Access was strictly regulated. 14 checkpoints guarded by the SS, the Jewish police, and the infamous Blue Police. Only one corner faced the Vistula River, Warsaw Ghetto, a hell sealed in stone and barbed wire. By 1941, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Food was scarce, and what little remained was routinely confiscated by the SS. Hunger was turning to famine. In an effort to contain the crisis, Nazi Governor Hans Frank appointed 2 men, Hans Bibo, a German officer, and Dr. Zygmunt Nissenbaum, a Jewish nutritionist. Together, they implemented a rationing system designed to distribute minimal amounts of food and to pay small wages to thousands of Jews working in Nazi-run factories. But these measures barely made a difference. In the summer of 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, and the ghetto's supplies were redirected to the Eastern Front. The little that remained was not enough. Jews survived, barely, on potatoes, flour, and often on nothing at all. As hunger deepened, disease followed. Typhus spread like wildfire. Bodies piled up in the streets, unburied, uncounted. It's estimated that by this point, by 1941, death had become routine in the Warsaw Ghetto. On average, 5,500 people were dying each month from starvation. At times, the death toll soared above 15,000. As winter descended in 1942, the crisis reached its peak. Thousands continued to perish, slowly, painfully, consumed by hunger. And then came more deportees from Germany, frail, starving, with no access to food. They didn't stand a chance. In the first months of the year alone, over 5,000 people died simply from lack of nourishment. Despair wrapped itself around the ghetto like the bitter cold. And then, a horror beyond comprehension. In February, a mother, driven to madness by hunger, fed her son the flesh of his dead brother, cannibalism. It was the first documented case in the ghetto, a moment that froze even the cruelest hearts. It laid bare the slow, silent death that was consuming a people behind those walls. Food scarcity in the Warsaw Ghetto wasn't just a consequence of war. It was the product of deliberate starvation. The calorie rations set by the Nazi-run general government under Hans Frank were grotesquely unequal. A German soldier or SS officer received 2,130 calories per day. Foreign nationals from neutral countries were allotted 1,790. Polish citizens were granted 634. And the Jews? They were given just 184 calories, a death sentence in numbers. To make things worse, Jewish residents had to pay vastly more for food. Where a German paid 18 zloty and a Pole paid 62, Jews were forced to pay as much as 95 zloty for the same item. Under these conditions, a typical Jewish family lived week to week on a pitiful ration. Barely a kilogram of bread, tiny portions of sugar, jam, fat, and if lucky, some potatoes, or the rare scrap of meat or fish. In this nightmare, only 2 lifelines remained: the black market and smuggling. Children played a crucial role. Their small frames allowed them to slip through cracks in the walls. Darting past Nazi guards unseen, adults devised clever schemes of their own, tunneling beneath foundations, hiding goods inside bricks, or tossing sacks of food over barbed wire. Some streets were less guarded than others: Kozla, Siena, Rzhibovska, and even the old Jewish cemetery. It was there that a group of smugglers achieved the unthinkable. They smuggled in 23 cows without being caught. Despite the constant threat of violence and total control enforced by the Nazi regime, a handful of humanitarian organizations fought back in quiet defiance. Groups like the Jewish Social Self-Help and the Joint Distribution Committee provided food and aid to roughly 160,000 people. It wasn't enough to solve the crisis, but it gave hope to a people trapped in despair. In 1942, hopelessness ruled the ghetto. But then came a flicker of light. News arrived that the Germans had retreated from Rostov on the Eastern Front. For a brief, trembling moment, hope returned. Rostov? The name itself echoed in Yiddish as Rosh Tov, a good beginning. But that hope was crushed. The German army quickly recaptured the city, and the ghetto fell silent once more.